Richo, universities and how out of control they have become, nothing really surprising there. But I've got to say some credit to 60 Minutes, who decided to pick up and further take to a bigger, even bigger audience what we've been talking about here for a very long time on Sky News, which is what's going on in UQ, and specifically what's been going on when it comes to that student, the student who claims he was persecuted because he had the balls to stand up against China. I noticed today that you have the Chinese effectively, not the ambassador, but the consul general to Queensland, wanting to plead diplomatic immunity, that they shouldn't be able to be called before a court to actually explain whether they put any pressure on the University of Queensland, on UQ. But Bob Katter has come out and said we need to get on top of this. We should have a federal inquiry into foreign influence, namely Chinese, into our educational institutions. Roll the tape.
We will get to the bottom of why you, the Queensland University, punished a person for expressing his opinion in the public arena, and an opinion which every decent person on earth would agree with. They saw the brutal attack, they know it's there, and they've done nothing about it.
Now, Richo, this story matters because did someone in the Chinese consulate, not an embassy, one step down is when they're not in the capital, that's what they're called, in Brisbane, is leaning on UQ to go after a student who's publicly doing what we can all freely do in Australia, which is speak out against China?
It certainly looks like it. And the worry you've got, of course, is it's not just UQ. I mean, how much influence do the Chinese have in universities right around Australia? The number of Chinese students is extraordinary. And universities so often rely on them to make sure they can fund themselves. So some universities, Paul, are pretty reluctant to stand up to the Chinese, which I find very sad, because if there's one lot that need to be stood up to on occasion, it's the Chinese.
Yeah, it's this thing where Jacinta Price, I mean, we have an inquiry into everything else. Why shouldn't we be having an inquiry into whether the educational systems that we established, that we fund as taxpayers, where we have a deal, where it's not about whether you're rich enough, but it's whether, theoretically, you're smart enough to go to university, we'll pay for you to go, start paying us back when you earn 50 grand. But the business model of universities has now become so bastardised by China that diplomatic immunity could mean that we will never know if the Chinese government was telling an Australian university to shut that kid up.
Yeah, it's almost criminal. And of course, we are funding the universities. I absolutely agree with Mr. Katter on this particular issue. And especially as, you know, it's deeply concerning in that this is a time at the moment where unis are rallying against our own culture and purging courses in Western civilization. However, seem to be taking direction from Chinese government. And as Richo pointed out, you know, many of these universities depend on Chinese students. University of Queensland, you know, 20% of their income is derived of Chinese students. And it is deeply concerning as the taxpayer, and certainly also as a mother well, my eldest is at university at the moment, and there will be more to come to go through university. I think there most certainly needs to be an inquiry.
Yeah, I mean, Rowan, I know you talk about it a lot in The Outsiders. You write about it so beautifully in the Spectator. But this matters, right? We started these institutions, we fund these institutions, but when somebody's about to plead diplomatic immunity to whether they told a uni to shut that kid up, that means we should be having some sort of public parliamentary inquiry at the very least, so these people have to come forward and answer the questions that they won't ever answer, because frankly the only people asking them are frankly us, your good self. 60 Minutes had a crack, but nobody else is going to ask them.
Yeah, well, good on Bob Katter. Fantastic for him taking up this cause, and Drew Pavlou's cause. As Jacinta Price says, we have our universities who won't even take the Ramsay Centre course for civilization, which is basically looking at a few books from the past and saying, and you know, a few sort of concepts and ideas from the Enlightenment and exploring them. Oh no, that would be corrupting. That's white supremacy. That's you know, that's somehow bastardizing the purity of intellectual thought. Yet these same clowns, we see the Confucius centres, we see people like Bob Carr and others sitting on these big fancy presumably well-remunerated boards of Chinese centres of learning. We have our businesses. We know from Secretary Pompeo's speech the other day and from work done by the Australian Strategic Institute that virtually every large company that has links to China will have within it members of the security forces, Chinese security forces, in other words, basically spies, pushing forward for those businesses to push the Chinese political agenda throughout the West. And this applies throughout, as I said, the whole West. So we should be really, really worried about this. I suspect Drew Pavlou will be seen in later years as the kind of the canary in the gold mine and the warning sign that this is a lot more dangerous and deeper than we realise at the moment.
I didn't realise, because of course I sit next to you every time in the man cave, that there is a beautiful radiation sunset of green behind you right now in the man cave. Has anyone tipped over something there while I was away? Did Chris Smith sort of put a couple of isotopes back there? What's going on?
Oh, you wouldn't. It's party time here at the studio, Paul. Whenever you're away, no one's allowed to say, but mate, it just goes off.
Yeah, I thought I could notice a little dent in the table. Anyway, big thanks to Chris Smith for kicking ass, as always, is the great Corey Bernardi. Richo, I keep cutting you off. It's all yours now.
Look, I worry about this thing about universities and freedom of speech, because one thing's for sure, it's not just yesterday, it's not just 5 years, it's a decade or more. You try and get up at Sydney University, or any other one, frankly, and make a speech in defence of Israel. See how you go. See how many words you get out before you're drowned out by the mob. You're simply not allowed to. Free speech has been allowed to be taken away, to be chipped away at year after year after year, and we've done nothing. Nothing. And I find that really absurd. If you believe in free speech, then you ought to be able to defend Israel at a university. But you tell me which university you can do that at.
Bloody oath. Well, let alone you challenge the orthodoxy like we all do, but certainly Jacinta does when it comes to Indigenous issues. And look what happens. Twitter will come for you every time. All the sorts of abuse that would be hurled at anyone else, of course, wouldn't be tolerated. Completely okay when it comes her way.